I can start recording.
I remembered one more thing.
Yeah.
Early in the morning, I can't do that.
Okay, now we're ready.
Are we ready?
Yes.
All right, so I'm gonna rewind, start over. Good morning, everybody.
Good
Friday
morning.
Good morning, thank you. So had I think had a really good day yesterday. For those of you that are joining virtually, you missed some beautiful scenery, really, for a little bit of a recap, kind of a really meaningful stop, looking between the Cabinet Yaak and the Selkirk, two systems that really, we stood on this hill, and I think we'd been there, 6-7 years ago too, if any of you were around to look at that spot, but had a chance to physically see that, when we talk about distances between some of these populations, it's not a very big distance. You can look across it and, 10 miles maybe, but a lot of close potential for connectivity. And obviously we heard from Wayne yesterday that even their collared bears are showing movement between the Cabinet Yaak and the Selkirk. And so we have evidence of that. And I think folks wanted to just, put that physically in front of us so that we could think about, as we move forward, what should we be aware of? How should we be thinking about this? And so it was, I think, a pretty, powerful place to stand and have that discussion. It was a little annoying because we were on the highway, and I have a massive aversion to big motorcycles and Jake brakes. I had a headache for the afternoon standing there from all that, but the point that was made by that visual, I think, was a really good pivot point for us to then take some discussion forward. We then went to the second stop, had lunch. Really appreciate Idaho providing lunch for us, Ed and Toby. So, when you break bread and you have a chance to visit, you can also get into some good discussions. And we had a presentation from the guy that's managing an area right on the Canadian border, from bees to bears. And I think it just drove home, again, that, these bears are in areas, and expanding into areas that maybe, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they weren't. And so good discussion there. And then we got into some real deep discussion around what does a path forward look like? What are the options for potentially moving forward? And we started to kind of gin that up, really to move into today. And I think we have at least 3 things we want to talk about, see if we can land on maybe not a final decision, but maybe some steps moving forward. And so I think everybody was honest, everybody was respectful, everybody, but obviously some strong feelings around, what is the right path forward and what should we be thinking about. So that's kind of a sum of what we did yesterday, kind of how we went through it. And I think, David, that set the stage for what we're going to do this morning. But it was, I will say, for folks that are out there virtually, there is a different feel when you're in the room. And I know we will be in the probably hybrid mode for a while, but I tell you, when you're standing across the table or across a room from somebody and having those discussions, it really does take on kind of a different tenure, and you can't just blank out your screen, right? When you're virtual, you can, I'm going to take myself off screen. But when you're all in the room together, you hang in there and you talk through some stuff. So I wish you all were with us, and even though we'll continue to probably offer the hybrid, there is a different feel when you're together. So I think I'll stop there, David, and then you can maybe set up for how we want to move through this morning.
Thanks, Jackie. And first, I guess I will start with the logistics again. We are in a hybrid mode with this meeting. So I want to make sure everyone knows who is in this meeting. So I actually feel like doing a quick introduction
All for it.
makes sense, and appreciate the members of the executive committee that have their cameras on. That helps us visually cue in the room that you're present and with us. And also appreciate members of the public that are listening to keep their camera off and muted for now. We do have a public comment portion of this agenda, and we will look forward to your input. Maybe we start on the screen in the remote. So the members of the committee who are joining us remotely, if you could just quickly say hello, and who you're representing. And we'll start. I just saw Jennifer's camera come on.
Good morning, everyone. Jennifer Carpenter here, representing the National Park Service Intermountain Region for the parks, Grand Teton, Yellowstone, and Glacial.
Okay, Ruth.
Good morning, Ruth Miller, and I'm representing the Bureau of Land Management.
Thanks, Frank.
Good morning, Frank Vermaelen, representing the U.S. Geological Survey.
Thank you, Jackie.
I always wanted to say the other Jackie. He says Jackie, I'm
Understood.
like lean forward. Yeah.
That happened to me once the other day when we were talking. So, hi, everybody. Jackie Gross. I am representing the Forest Service Pacific Northwest region, which covers Oregon and Washington. Great to be here.
Thanks, and Hannah.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry to have missed the field trip yesterday. Hannah Anderson with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Thanks, Hannah. And I did hear that from Michael Burwash with British Columbia that he had a personal issue come up and won't be joining us this morning. So I don't think there are any other members of the executive group online. Is that correct?
JJ Tears is on.
Oh, JJ Tier is a subcommittee chair. Welcome, JJ. I think you may be muted, JJ.
JJ Tier, good morning. Idaho Fish and Game, Lewis and Idaho, chair of the Veteran Subcommittee. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other subcommittee chairs? I'm sure. Okay, so now we'll go around the room and introduce the folks at the table, and we'll start with Ken McDonald.
Good morning, I'm Ken McDonald. I'm the Chief of the Wildlife Division with Montana Fish, Wildlife, Parks, representing Montana here today. I'm Rick King with Wyoming Game and Fish, Chief of the Wildlife Division.
Hillary Cooley, Fish and Wildlife Service, Grizzly Bear Recovery Program, advisor to the committee.
Hey, good morning, Chris Savage, representing the northern region of the Forest Service.
Good morning, Ed Schriever, Director, Idaho Fish and Game. In solidarity with you folks attending virtually, I skipped the tour yesterday just so I could be with you.
Jackie Buchanan, Deputy Regional Forester in the Rocky Mountain region and current chair, and Ed is the vice chair. Right? Is that what we landed on?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're vice. Current chair of IGBC.
My name is David Diamond, and I'm the executive coordinator of the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee.
Lori Roberts. I work on the NCDE Research Trend Monitoring Program, but I am the IEO chair and IT today.
Morning, Scott Jackson, Forest Service National Carnivore Program Lead, and I'm an advisor to IGBC.
Good morning, Jody Bush, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Region 1. I'm sitting in today for Hugh Morrison, who was called away.
Good morning, Deb Okeson, Deputy Regional Forester, Intermountain Region of the Forest Service.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Again, thanks to Idaho for a great tour yesterday. Idaho Regional Director for Fish and Wildlife Service in the Mountain Prairie.
Great. So there's the members of the committee, and we do have a few folks in the audience. We'll maybe start in the back.
Yes, I'm Jared Fidelius with USDA Wildlife Services. I'm the City Director for Idaho.
John Stiver with USDA Wildlife Services, Assistant Regional Director for the Western Region.
Ben Jimenez, conflict coordinator, just respond to this.
Toby Goudreau, Idaho Fish and Game.
Christy Johnson Hughes, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Josh Ariardi, Idaho Governor's Office of Species Conservation.
Yeah, Gary Bertolotti, NCD Vice Chair, Idaho, or Montana Fish and Wildlife.
Kathy Trevor with the Idaho Attorney General.
Great, and thanks to everyone for being here with us this morning. How do you want to drive in?
So let's cover with the points or the areas that we want to talk about. One of the things, so we have a defined amount of time total. I think we're supposed to finish up at noon today, right? So we have a couple of things that are could be pretty meaty and pretty big. And so one of our thoughts was we should prioritize, like, what do we, what is the highest priority for us to talk about, and start with that, and then work down through the list. And a few are a little bit more administrative, but I think the big one is this. Well, I go over the three of them, David, set us up, and then we can get a consensus if we can from the group on what to start with.
Okay, well, so I've got some smaller pieces that have come forward. One is a need to reconvene the budget committee to prepare the FY23 budget plan. So that's something I'm going to be asking for, and I've got some details on it. I don't think that will take very long.
That's pretty simple and straightforward.
Similarly, Hillary, you had made a request on sort of a look at meeting protocols for executive meetings and subcommittee meetings. And again, I think what Jackie has sort of instructed me for this meeting is we're trying to drive towards actions. Who will do what by when? What are we committing to going forward? So again, that one I think we can do fairly quickly. So there were three that were sort of on the agenda coming into this meeting. One was on Wednesday. You heard the presentation from Lori Roberts and the Bear Smart Working Group. You have the materials in your packet that they prepared, the brochure, the PowerPoint for communities, and the draft manual that would support that program. And you have questions in front of you on whether to not accept that work, whether to accept it and post it as a resource, or whether to accept it and provide some IGBC level support, maybe in conjunction, well, definitely in conjunction with an interagency support group. So that's one question. The second area is the continuation of the strategic discussion that we had in March, where we're trying to get to a point where we can articulate the high-level goals of this committee as opposed to the individual organizations or things outside. And we're trying to align the working groups to support those goals. So you've got some broad IEO goals, and you have a broad IEO effort that includes things like the IEO summit that's planned for next year. You have, but we know we can sharpen those goal statements, which will help us make progress. So science is another category there, and then conflict is one where we don't really have we haven't dialed in the statement of what we're trying to accomplish and where, because it's obviously, we're working on that everywhere with many different partners. So what's the IGBC piece? Do we want to stand up some new structure or group? That's the high level overarching goals question. And the third is the subcommittees. So in the past, the way IGBC has worked with subcommittees, they have prepared 5-year plans. Those include goals, objectives, strategies. Those include reporting on accomplishments from the previous fiscal year and planned actions for the next fiscal year. So December would be the winter business meeting for this group, the IGBC. And I've been in this position for a year now, which means I saw the fall meetings of the subcommittees and I saw the spring meetings of the subcommittees. And it has been good to see the variation and the terrific work that takes place there. And I think there is a desire, however, to look, what is the executive committee looking for, and how can we rebuild or revisit this question of, we're committing a lot of agency time. And again, how are we measuring progress in those subcommittees? So those are the three things. The Bear Smart is a specific tactical thing. The overarching goals of IGBC is a strategic thing. And the direction to subcommittees and the 5-year planning effort is a strategic thing as well.
So if I may, David. So David did mention, kind of looking for us to be able to move forward, has some clear work that we're doing and to be able to take some actions. And if you think about this, all the folks that are, on the committee, the executive committee and the subcommittees, that's a lot of high-powered government time committed to this. And the intent has always been, the 40 years, I think 40 years ago when this group was established, was to help us move forward in, the whole piece of working with this species, from the conservation side to the science side to the management side, with that ultimate goal of delisting. And so, for the time we're investing, being able to clearly, show what we're working towards, and great work has been done. I mean, the subcommittees, we know the caliber of folks that are working on the subcommittees, and they're amazing. But they're looking for what do you want us to do on behalf of the executive committee? What's the direction we should take? And then for the execs, it's we're making a big investment here. So, what are we getting, or what's coming out of that investment? So we've just been having some discussions around, how do we move forward and kind of clearly have this lined out in a way that we can demonstrate that both to all the folks that are putting all the time and effort into it, and then even to the public and the people who, are watching from all other sides of this. So that's where it's coming from. And, we've had members almost say, pretty close to saying of, if we're not really doing anything, because just coming together to talk has never been the intent of this organization, the time we're investing. It's been, moving forward. How can we move forward? And so I just feel a strong obligation, and, I've got 6 months left in my chair. So, you get that from me for 6 months. Ed will be taking over in December, and he'll have, whatever his thinking is or feeling, but I don't think I'm far off alignment, at least in this desire, right, Ed, for action? Yes. It's really quiet this morning, but I'm gonna get something from him.
Not gonna get in your way right now.
No. So, but that's where this is coming from, is, how do we have a clear plan, or what is the plan as we move forward for the rest of this year, set the subcommittees up for success going into their plan for redoing those 5 years. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of give a little of that, again, conversations that we've had ginned up. Okay. So.
Okay, so we can take it in the order that I listed them, or if there's one that you think maybe would help start things off. Maybe.
But we need some participation.
Yeah, we'll get it. So if you would share the screen and put that document up.
Is it on this? Oh, here it is.
Word here, that one. Somebody. Okay, so again, I'm going to go for the easy wins to start. So we had a very effective and helpful budget subcommittee as I was coming into the position and learning the mechanism for the IGBC portion of this. Each of the agencies makes major contributions through their own staffing and infrastructure, but the IGB itself has a small piece that includes myself. I'm the one employee, and a portion of dollars that can go out for things like information education outreach awards. The people listed there were part of it. Ruth and Chris may be surprised that their predecessors were part of this. So if you would scroll a little bit, Lori. This shows where the discretionary dollars keep going down, went in FY22. And what you can see here is, we have this ongoing commitment to the bear resistant container program. But we have the ongoing commitment to information education outreach grants. We have a small portion, the 4,600 is for updating the IGBC website to automate the bear resistant container program information, so that when a consumer goes there, they can search for their brand of cooler or what product type they're looking for and get results back. And also so that the manufacturers can, apply it to be in part of the process through the website, and it will save overhead administrative costs down the road. So that's a small investment there that's going to pay off, I think, for us. I mentioned yesterday, the bear resistant container program is, by far the most visited portion of our website. It just dwarfs everything else on it in terms of interest and visitation. So, but what you also see here was the big investment made in this Bear Smart contractor. Andrea Morehouse was under contract this year and helped produce this draft manual that you're looking at today. And again, we could maintain that going forward, that level. We could shift that or increase IEO grants. I mean, that's where we can turn the dial a little bit within this small amount of dollars. So if you'd scroll down a little bit more, Lori, I guess what I'm suggesting we send over to that budget committee, and it will need to be in the next month or two to prepare for FY23. We have ongoing questions about our funding model, and I know we had the Idaho Fish and Game review of the bear resistant container, or set of recommendations that we've adopted most of those, but we still have this question of let's look at the program and the finances there. There's a possibility that the decisions you might make related to Bear Smart might require us to do something here in this budget. And then, do you want more IEO, less IEO, more Bear Smart, less Bear Smart? And then the real question, and I'm pleased to now have these basic mechanics sort of mastered. I understand the interagency agreements. I know where the dollars are. I can make that part work. But Hillary, I think you mentioned yesterday there's tremendous amount of resources, and also John Stiver from APHIS Wildlife Services mentioned other investments, both from federal agencies in the Department of Agriculture, for example, but also from NGOs, from private organizations, and looking to leverage what we're doing here externally. So that's a longer term question for that group. So maybe I break this down with, first of all, if you scroll back up to the people, would the people on the budget committee agree to meet with me and work those things through in the next couple months?
Chris
Yes,
is in
yes.
here, but we'll say yes for Chris. Service.
And I just said yes.
So
Matt shook his head.
Shook my head, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, I guess I should say which way.
No, but you were on the budget committee. Oh, I'm sorry. That is outdated. Yeah, would you fix that, Lori?
To say it.
So Ed, would you like to do that, serve in that role? Obviously, you're the vice chair.
Obviously.
But any interest in the budget committee?
So let it be written, so let it be done.
Okay,
Okay.
fantastic.
And Hannah said yes. Oh,
Okay.
Ruth. Ruth is there.
And Ruth, I'm sorry, we can't see you on the screen at the moment because we're sharing the screen.
Oh, yeah, I said yes.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Easy wins. And it does feed into then the next discussion. So if you keep going. So Hillary, you had mentioned to me that you wanted to talk, and there's nothing under that. It's just, it's ready to be talked about.
I'm ready to type.
Sort of, and actually a number of folks have mentioned to me, this committee has been around a long time and has had many people sit in chairs for every single organization has been represented at this point by, torches have been passed and repassed. And it is incredible sort of the memory of how we work together and, what has been accomplished in the different committees. And we have a charter and we have an MOU that describe how we work together, but you had a thought about sort of just basic meeting, like what was if you could remind me of what your thought was here.
I'm just reviewing the charter too, and some of it I think part of it may be incoming chairs that need to review the charter and some of the protocols, because there are, some of the questions are answered in the charter. And I think that's important that people understand how the decision-making works and how the role between the subcommittees and the executive committee works as well.
So again, and this is now, it's nice to be a full-time coordinator. I have done onboarding briefings as new members of executives have come on. I have tried to do that at the subcommittee level as well. But I think I need to spend, I look forward maybe to getting a group of subcommittee chairs together and thinking about that a little bit, and maybe preparing a package of you're going to be the news, what are the things for a meeting? What are the things for reporting? And we're going to, of course, be talking about that in a minute of what the report out for in December will be for subcommittees. So maybe as an action, does anyone, it's certainly something that's on my plate of engaging, and I've told folks that sometimes I think my role is the reminder in chief, because you say we've done it before. There's nothing new here, but the people in the chairs change, and the institutional responsibilities stay are still there. So, but we've also changed things like the technology, the way meetings happen. We've had to learn and adapt, and so I will take this as a maybe like a one pager of, maybe it's what it is it's roles and responsibilities. Being a member of the executive committee, being a member of a subcommittee, being a chair or vice chair of each, and how you work with advisors too in those, because each subcommittee has advisors as well.
And maybe also some things like, we've had a lot of discussion because members of the public watch each subcommittee and how it operates. And so like even this year we had, well, we saw this happen in this subcommittee, but it didn't happen like that in that subcommittee. So that's just the consistency thing of, how are the meetings conducted? Everybody has good intention. Nobody has bad intention, but it's helping folks get up to speed as you transition in to, what's that commonality of how things operate. So there's a lot, Hillary, that can and should probably be kind of in that stepping into this role. Here's what to expect.
Go through an effort 10 years ago or so to write out roles and responsibilities. I think I have a copy of those, but I don't know if they're on the website under our archives or something like that. That might be a starting place to see what needs to be, how that's evolved.
Yeah, so you've just proven the point, Scott. No new issues here. Smart people have thought about these things for a long time. I have access to those records and I can pull those up. So I think this is fairly straightforward, and I will interact with the chairs and the
advisors
and the advisors, and also make a commitment as we have transitions to brief new members.
Sort of under the same heading. This committee and the subcommittees have 5-year plans.
Yep.
And I can't recall in the last 5 years ever going back and looking at our 5-year plan and say, are we doing this or not doing this? To me, one of the protocols ought to be, if we're going to have these plans, is just a standing agenda item of what are we supposed to be doing this year? Didn't do it. And
I think
hold ourselves accountable for our plan.
We looked at it, Sealy Lake, that was a little bit, did we touch back? I mean, you were there, but not in your role.
No,
Matt, you were there.
That's what I'm queuing up here for. That's our third decision here is, in the packet you've got in the strategic conversation we had in December and then again in March, the high level goals that are stated in those 5-year plans haven't changed. And the strategies, the actions planned, you're right. The reporting has changed. It has become a little different, and part of it is because of this uncertainty and sort of where we are in the work. So we maybe need to talk through that, but you're right, Ken, if we're going to be asking subcommittees to report in December, there should be a direction in the front end of here's what we expect. And that I'm hoping we can get to that in the subcommittee discussion. And I have, and I can.
It's the
That,
executive
and
team.
that's what I have is the second decision bucket, which was your overarching goals.
I'm
And
gonna scroll down to that.
yeah, well,
Or do you want to?
is that next?
Bear-
No,
Bear Smart
so
next.
what I have, yeah, so do you want to go there first and then Bear Smart is a tactical piece or? That was good for you. All right, so as I mentioned, as was discussed on Wednesday, there's not much. IGBC is really its member agencies. There is not an IGBC. It is you. We have one program, which is the bear resistant container program. And we've had this discussion at multiple meetings in recent years, looking at the British Columbia model, where a set of steps, a set of criteria is outlined, and it's sort of the voluntary model where if they want to go through it, and they have some technical advice along the way, and then they have at the end some recognition that they have gone through those steps. And so our options here are to say, that's great, thank you, but we're not going to do that, put that out as an IGBC product. We could accept the documents, we'll have to revise them if it's just a publication, but we could publish those criteria as a resource. Maybe I'll provide some networking opportunities for connecting, hearing from communities. That would be the option 2. And then the third is to provide some staff support at the IGBC level. And again, you saw in the budget, we have about 23,000, maybe as much as 27,000 once the website comes off, that could provide some contracting support. Contracting will be what I would be able to do easily for FY23, but then there's longer term options too. But really the question is, do you want someone to be a resource to connect the communities that have questions to their state specialists, to contractors, to consultants, and to third-party sources of funding? That would be the role of some IGBC port. So in listening to the conversation on Wednesday, these were some issues that I heard in that discussion, and I'm very open to any other questions that folks have. But one thing was what form does recognition take? The way the documents are drafted, it is the same way that the British Columbia one is, which is certification, certified Bear Smart. And we heard some concerns about how that might be viewed. You're still going to have conflict. You're still going to need to do management. The document very clearly says that that's the case, but of course, words mean quite a bit. So is it an approval? Is it a seal? Is there some, do we think there's value in the idea of incentivizing a community to go through it and then be able to say that they're recognized at the end? And then a related question to this recognition question is, who is doing the recognition? Is it IGBC that says, here's your, yes, you've done it? Or it could be that it's a state that does that. So there's these shared criteria that you all have endorsed as the IGBC, but then the actual decision on any one community might come from the state in which that community is a part. So anyway, there's a bunch of questions about recognition. And then we had the question about geographic scope. AFWA has this black Bearwise, they just call it Bearwise, which is just informational. It doesn't have this recognition component. And again, any question that's raised, Jackie's looking to try to get to some decisions. So it would be, if people have ideas about how to limit the scope here, because our intent, as with the bear resistant container program, is that we're the grizzly bear committee, we're not the black bear committee. And so if we're working with communities, it's going to be in that grizzly bear recovery zones. And then, this question that we've gotten some feedback that there is interest in third-party funders to help communities that are starting this process. And, again, that seems like it's an important thing if this is going to be successful. That's the whole theory of the case, is that by having the process and the criteria published, then the communities can find help to go down the road. But there may be other things here, and I guess I'm just going to now open the discussion to see where folks are, having thought about it.
And if I may, I really don't have a end option that I, would land on myself right now. I would say folks put a lot of work and did a lot of good work coming up with the product that they have so far. So if there's it seems like at least finishing that and having it wrapped up, or they just spent 6 months, or I don't know, how long did y'all work on that?
About a year and a half.
About a year and a half. So I, that's just in my head, I'm like, that's a lot of time to then just walk away, especially if it's something good. But I don't know how to, what the right thing is to move that forward, but we had folks working on that. And they worked on it with the support of the committee. And so I struggle a little bit with, that's a lot of investment to, and time of folks. So that's just in my head. So I don't have a clear end goal, but that's, I just have an awareness of that.
Chris beat me by a nanosecond.
Oh, you are here, Chris. I missed you. I just said yes for you on the budget team, and I didn't even think you were here.
Yeah.
I heard that. I guess I'm kind of with Jack on this one, and I'm wondering, could there be like an option 0.5 where, because I think there was a lot of still at the end of the day yesterday, Matt, you brought up a lot of questions and still some things to consider, more information that would be helpful to say, if we had this additional information, then we could really consider things around format. A little bit more direction back to the subject. Going to go to Austin 3. Here are some other things you need to know about, but we do want to continue moving forward with everything that's been put together today and completing it.
Yes, I would say yes, and I think that would be great if as long as the executive committee can be giving some clear pathways for our group. I will say that we still have, we are meeting with the University of Montana social scientists this month to continue working on the survey, the 2 surveys that we want to put into it, which I think is a big component to the program, to have a social survey that would be, collected from all these different communities. That could be very useful. And then the clarifying questions that are up there, we can definitely tackle a lot of those and come up with additional recommendations. So, yeah, I'm okay. I mean, yeah.
Maybe just tagging on with what Chris said, that's kind of where my mind goes as well. And I wonder, based on Lori's response to him, if it doesn't make sense for us to have a small working group of executive committee members, so we don't have them bring us another rock game, and because they've done a lot of good work, and don't want to have them bring us something and say, no, that's really not what we were concerned about. So first, because they've done a lot of good work, I think we should keep moving forward with it, but there are, as Chris said, still a few
hanging
things
chads
we've got to sort out, and so that's where I would land.
So like a 2.5 or 1.75 or.
So I'm fine with option 2, to recognize the good work that's been done and codify that. Not let that slip through our fingers. The additional information, I think the clarifying questions are pretty close, but to move to option 3, there's just a lot of, what does that mean? And the geographical scope or the capacity of the program then drives what kind of support we need for the program, and that's a budgeting question, and we don't know that. We don't know if the objective of this would be to certify, approve, or give a seal to one community a year or 12 communities a year.
Right.
And that's a completely different scope. And I don't know that. And so I could not agree to option 3 now because I don't know what that means. I don't know what the short-term nor the long-term commitments of that would be.
Mhm.
And then I fall back to, this group has been together for 40 years and our job is to provide the conservation to recover these bears and delist them. And in 2 ecosystems, we've recovered these bear populations, and the inability to delist recovered populations is resulting in bear distribution moving into places where people, it's both, right? It's people moving into bear country, but it's more and more bears moving into people country. And I have this concern about bringing in NGO dollars from folks who are on the bend that suck it up. People need to learn to live with bears wherever that's occurring. And I struggle with that. I struggle with, if you just get your community certified, then you can coexist with these bears and they should be able to expand their range into places where I just philosophically have a disagreement with that. So I need to reconcile that in my head about where this goes and what are the intents. I'm all about reducing conflict and public safety and having all that in place. But I see this as a result of our inability to achieve the objectives of delisting recovered bear populations and managing the sprawl and spread of them into places where they are unsuitable. So I need more concrete understanding of the implementation of the program before I'm in a position to vote yes on 3. So I guess just supporting Chris and Matt's comments.
David, I've got this Jennifer having questions.
Oh.
Yeah, it's fine. I don't have the benefit of being on the field trip and hearing the discussions or anything, and but hear the concerns today. I don't think it's a good idea for just accept and publish as a resource option 2. I think that would be confusing to the public. I think if we're going to do it, we're going to do it. And I'm not saying get to option 3 with statement. I'm just saying that if we're going to roll it out in some fashion, then let's try to, put everything towards it to be successful in whatever way we choose to do it. So I guess long story short, I support Chris and Matt's statements as well in terms of let's investigate a little bit more. I get people's points on the certify and what certification maybe means to some people versus approval or seal of approval or something to that effect. So I guess my 2 cents is, I think answering some questions and having some more follow up on some of these concerns and trying to keep the ball moving forward in some fashion. And my personal opinion, I guess, for whatever it's worth, is that I think that this complements our progress in our ability to delist, in the sense that it provides some ability for communities to maybe better understand You know, in areas, I get there are areas, Ed, what you're saying, to where you don't think bears are suitable to live, and there are areas where they are. And I
Yeah,
get
absolutely.
that. I'm just trying to reduce conflict and allow for better proactive management of bears regardless of location. Thanks.
So we'll need a motion at some point. That's maybe.
Well, so there was a comment, Ruth made a comment in the chat there. Again, a clarifying point. If we were to accept and publish, we still have action for the working group, which is to go back and revise to remove this the certification side of it, because we would not be offering that. We would be saying, here's some steps that you could look at doing. You know, the challenge, of course, with bears, I mean, the intent, as I understand it, is that this would be completely voluntary. And the purpose here, the challenge is that even when you've done some of the things, you've built the plan, you've gone through the process, you know, Bear Smart isn't an end point. There's not one point where, you know, it's done. It's an ongoing, you know, sort of, change. So that's the idea here, is that we create that incentive and partnership and access to the technical expertise that the IGBC represents, not as the IGBC again, but as its constituent partners, the states and agencies. Matt, do you have a thought?
Well, is there, for Lori, Jennifer's point, it seems like if we publish something without really knowing what the final end point is, that's just going to confuse the public. And so is there any, is there a major downside to just, as we work through this and work out the more details and figure out where we ultimately want to land, to just not like are there people like watching our website every day waiting for this to publish, or
I mean,
are we okay?
I think there's a small group, but they can look at the PowerPoints we've published. They can listen to the talks. They have an idea of what to do.
So it's not like we have 10 partners waiting for the outcome of this.
No, I mean, no, I don't think so right away, but I do think that there are people that are hoping that there is an umbrella that they can be under to have a seal. I don't know, I don't want to say certification anymore because I don't really like the word either, but to just have the partnership, to have the you know, and you know, I guess I just will say, like, you know, this idea came about because and I know you guys are going to talk about this soon, but because of the 5-year plan that the executive group came up with the idea of helping of connectivity in the communities in between, or connectivity was your goal. And so this is kind of one of those ways of working with connectivity and reducing conflicts, even if it is just black bears, or maybe if they don't even have any, that can, you know, that can be a part of their plan, saying we don't now, but because we see a growing bear population, you know, we want to get in front of it and do these small things for our community, help with the education, help with the, you know, garbage, things like that. And then I guess it also does help with the mission of this group too, to move towards recovery. So
I guess, Jackie, to keep this moving, I'd move that we it's endorse the concept, and help me with the here, maybe if it needs to be refined, but endorse the concept and establish a working group of the executive committee to work with whatever your committee is called, Lori, to
smart groups these days.
smart. So we'll create a dumb group of executive committee. Who've been working on this. I hope an expectation of.
So really not option 2 per se, but in a 2A, to clarify, get questions answered, clear up the certifier, whatnot.
Yeah, and so thanks. That's well crafted. I guess before you go further on the motion, I just want to explore this question of so this interagency group agreed on the criteria and these products. Is there an option here of, you know, the community that wants to then actually use them goes straight to the state? Is that? Yeah, we're gonna be bear wise, that's how it already functions.
Yeah.
Information, the products you guys develop, been served, been sort of pilot projects. State level.
Or in Wyoming's case, supplement what they already have established. But maybe that's some of the clarifying things between now and December they would come up with.
We really need to speak, they're having a hard time. hearing
Oh,
us.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
and-
couldn't hear Matt's motion. Can somebody restate Matt's motion, please?
What did you do, David, since I don't think I'm getting picked up very well by the hour?
Well, so Jennifer, if you didn't hear the motion, you also didn't hear his joke.
I heard the dumb part. I did hear that.
Yeah, so the motion was to endorse the concept and to recognize that there's some executive level direction that's needed here that we're likely not going to come up with this morning. And so we need a group of volunteers from this group to have a couple of interactions with the Bear Smart Working Group between now and December. And I'm not sure if I'm restating that exactly right.
Might be better.
And that it's with the intent of having a proposal for a program that could be adopted, but clarifying again the lanes and the roles and responsibilities. And this will be important, because again the community expectations out there. We want to be crystal clear in what the promise of this is and what the promise of this isn't. And Ed's point about not knowing the magnitude of the voluntary interest, I think does suggest caution here at the outset.
Yeah, I guess anything, put some hope to have a recommendation to this body back by the December meeting.
Okay, so the one, well, and again, so the one question I have then, because the budget committee is going to need to know, do we want to commit IGBC resources in the way that we did with the contractor over the last year in 23? That's sort of we need to know that sooner rather than later.
So that would be maintaining the budget as it was laid out last year with that we had 20-some thousand discretionary.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be a part of the proposal of just maintaining that, not adding more beyond that. But that, I guess that should be included in that because we would need it to finish it.
Jennifer has her hand.
Jennifer.
Yeah, thanks. So Lori, I guess the question to you is, when we go to meet with University of Montana, are we commissioning any sort of study? You talked about a survey. Are we committing money to that, or has that already been done? A little more clarification, because I guess that impacts budget.
Yeah, we are not committing any money. They have offered to assist us without any.
So then to complete, Hannah.
Thanks. I just sort of the same question just about the budget piece. So if we move towards this, go back and figure out these things and come back with a proposal in December, refined proposal in December, is there a need for financial support to achieve that proposal? Or are we talking about some level of support would be part of the proposal, like we want this support to do X or Y, or recommend X or Y. So that's my question. I know, do they need money now to come up with the recommendations or later?
I think we have what we need in terms of the program development. The point I was making was that if you said, let's do this in December, and we want to start doing work with communities, in the summer of 2023, then, potentially offering support at the IGBC level becomes a question.
Thanks, that's helpful.
So I'm back to, would you hold then that 23,000 to the side? I mean, not commit it, but not commit it somewhere else too? Or would that money be free for the budget committee to spend? That's the question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe we can come up with options, Hannah, in the budget committee. I know, we've got a long list actually of ideas all headed towards your overarching goals of IEO, science and conflict reduction. So it's just always, what's your top priority? That's the question.
So I guess
Okay, so the next,
executive
so the
wanna
next
be a
question
part
then,
of
so
the-
let,
Do we have a motion there?
yeah, so Matt,
We need to vote.
yeah, okay, so, and maybe we need to also restate it more
I don't
clearly.
even know.
Yeah.
Well, okay, before voting though, do you want to identify those interested executives?
Well, I have many.
Yeah, I was gonna
questions.
say
I
Jennifer.
have many questions, so I will volunteer as well.
I'll volunteer for the Forest Service
Okay,
unless anybody else is.
Yep, I saw that, yeah.
okay, that's a good group, a good representative group. And again, you'll be interacting directly with the Bear Smart Working Group, which also is representative. The list of folks who were involved in that is in the memo. And it would be helpful, I think, before the first meeting of that to, we'll share, we'll go back to them and describe some of the questions that you raised. And in some ways, it's actually a new set of questions. It isn't about technically how does the community do some things to reduce conflict. It's more the executive level questions of what does it mean for this group to endorse that so we're actually moving to a higher level discussion.
Yes, and I think there are, so I still wonder, it's voluntary. We're not mandating anything, and we're gonna put our brand on it, right? So you can do a bear-proof container, and once that thing has gone through the testing, as long as you use it correctly, that container is gonna be bear-proof. You go into a community and are we certifying an awareness, or are we certifying a level of practice? And if you're certifying a level of practice, that needs to be continuously applied voluntarily in the community. Is there an annual inspection for compliance? How do they maintain their IGBC stamp of approval if it's a level of practice versus a community awareness of what we should be doing, but maybe not because it's voluntary? I don't know how you do this.
But do we have to?
Well,
Okay. I think if you put your stamp of approval on it, you need to answer these kind of questions, because we certainly answer them in the Bear Proof Container program.
Yeah.
And you get the stamp of approval. So we'll get there.
Yeah,
We'll get there. I think this is good.
Yeah, it's a great point. And, so that, again, we're looking at others who have tried these things and there is sort of a 5-year review process that is in the thought now. But what that represents is an ongoing commitment.
Not just to engage in the education program, but it's also some check-in on a voluntary level of compliance that continues to be suitable, that you do in fact have a Bear Smart community.
Yes.
Not just one that wishes they were.
Yes. So good. So this is real program, management questions. And so the motion again is for the group of executives, Matt, Ed, Jackie, Jennifer, to meet with, and I think we still do have some time with Andrea.
Yes, we do. She still has time on her contract.
And the Bear Smart Working Group to really look at these clarifying questions, look at some of the options that may be available from the support side, either through IGBC or through the agencies, and come back to the executives in December with a recommendation.
Yeah, and I'd add if there's a need for a budget standpoint to put that placeholder in there in case we need any of those funds as a contractor, that we can always.
Shift
If we
it.
don't spend it all, we can say we can use it on something else, right?
Mhm.
But better to have it, not use it than need it and not have it.
Yeah. Okay, did we capture that, Lori?
Yeah,
Any questions from you and the Bear Smart Communities side of things?
I think we're good.
Go to the second.
Oh,
Okay, so the motion is seconded, and now we'll ask for any
Further discussion?
no, any, are there any opposed to the motion as just stated and seconded? And I'm not seeing any heads, yeah, no opposition heard, and so that will be an action then, Jackie.
Thank you.
That we've reached. So thanks, everybody, for that. Thanks to the Bear Smart Working Group. And we can move to our next topic.
I'll get the, sorry.
We've taken an hour.
All right, so scroll down, Lori.
I'm getting there.
So I've got two categories here. We've got the overarching goals for IGBC and the sort of overarching work groups that are related to those. So again, IEO, science, there's some action there, potentially conflict, there's an action there potentially. And the order that you take these is up to you. We can do the overall, or we can do the subcommittees. And again, top down has not been how this committee has worked in the past. That this is kind of new, this hybrid. Let's do work at the larger scale. So Ken, it may be useful to start actually at the bottom and work up with the subcommittees if you want to keep scrolling, Lori. And the need, sort of, for, my hope is to come out of this. If you look at the parenthetical there, in the past, we've had these 5-year plans. They haven't been updated. But the goal statements are listed here. And again, those are older goal statements. And then, it's sort of the direction to the subcommittee of updating that, share and being able to report to you, the executives in December, the planned, the accomplishments and the planned actions towards these goals. And so ideally over time, we're then able to track progress, make sure that we're using resources effectively. So I don't know where you want to start. Subcommittee level, IGBC level.
For me, it's sort of, go back to the charter, the IGBC is supposed to provide direction to the subcommittee to help us achieve our committee goal.
Yes.
And go to the charter, our goal is recovery.
Yes.
So it seems like hear from that, then the direction of the subcommittee should be, A, B, C, and D to get to recovery and delisting. And not necessarily tell them what A, B, C are, but tell them we want to address. And then apply that to ourselves as well. We had some discussions yesterday about recovery plan. Go look at our 2018 work plan. That was one of the things we were supposed to do over the last 5 years. And so again, I think we need to have some clear direction for this group, for them to be able to provide clear direction to subcommittees. And the other thing that I do is just sitting in subcommittees is, and somebody mentioned earlier today, it's kind of all over the board of how they operate and what they're reporting and happening. It seems like it'd be helpful if that provided a template of this is what we'd like the subcommittees to report back to us on. So there's some consistency.
Chris.
Yeah, I think building off of Ken, I remember the document that Chris Smith made
I'm sure.
around this, and though it was it was pretty overwhelming, I guess I would say. And I wonder if there was a way that we could pull that up and maybe condense it a little bit more than where Chris took it, because it was like I said, it was pretty long, there was a lot to it. At the time when I was a subcommittee chair, it was hard to really tackle everything that was being asked of us, but if it could be condensed into some of the key things that we want to focus on as an executive committee that the subcommittees can take on, I think that'd be a good place to start.
Yeah, so I've shared the, you know, the overwhelming feeling of looking at those spreadsheets. And I think that's the challenge. This is meant to be an interagency coordinating body, not a, you know, and so if we're adding work, you know, make work to fill things out in fields, that's not helpful. But we do want to make transparent to executives, you know, the things that are happening in these local geographies and give you a chance to, you know, set direction and then hear about progress. So, you know, in the last couple of years, you've had those higher level reports from the subcommittees and at the December meetings. But I think, yeah, the strategic engagement is what's missing. And I don't know that we're going to be able to do it this morning. We've had a couple cracks at it. You had it in front of you in December. You had it in front of you again in March. And, you know, I don't necessarily think, you know, that going offline in small groups is the way to do it. But maybe it's asking subcommittees themselves to refine what they've got, and then in December you can have that interaction as each of them presents. But I do think, Chris, you're right. They want clarity of, well, what, you know, tell us what we're looking for. Yeah, Deb.
So I was just going to comment that it seems like the states have some pretty strong feelings about what needs to be done. And so, you know, if we could maybe zero in on what those few things are, you know, recognizing there may be some other work as well, but.
Yep.
So thanks for the segue. I really do appreciate that. And David, I think there is an elephant, right, that we do need to deal with, but Jackie worked on me pretty hard last night over a cocktail about, you know, actually moving things today, things that are tangible, that need to get done. They're timely. They involve this committee, they involve the subcommittees. Some of them are kind of lingering. You know, the service is looking at some petitions and the clock is ticking on those and et cetera. But I think there are some things that we can hit the nail on the head that I hope we can all agree, you know, can refer to the 18 work plan. You know, the last time I sat on this committee, we revised the charter and the work plan. And I think right now we need a remnant analysis. We need a remnant analysis of the GYE. There's a petition that you all are considering that addresses the deficiencies that the court looked at. The states are doing their part, the service has a part, and that's the remnant analysis. And that needs to be done. The conservation strategy out of the GYE hit a few bumps in the subcommittee, and it needs to get back on track. The clock is ticking on both of those issues. They are lingering and they need to be done. And in the work plan of 18 and this discussion and Idaho's interest in revising a recovery plan that demonstrates a path, a real path, not a dead end, not you can't get there from here based on what we understand about bears, what they're doing, how they're connected today versus what we knew or didn't know in 1993. We've got some work to do in the Selkirk and Cabinet Yaak subcommittee. And I think we shined a pretty good light on those yesterday. And I think that's some real tangible work. I could break it down into more detail, but I think you guys heard that stuff yesterday about demographic criteria and habitat criteria and the size of the units that should be subunits. And we need those committees working together that make that recovery, those recovery areas similar so that it's not apples and oranges. The Selway Bitterroot Subcommittee has some work to do, probably a little. I'm focusing on occupied recovery areas and things that are tangible. They're right in front of our face, but it almost seems like it's a carrot on a stick hanging over your head, and you never get close enough to it to actually eat it. And we need to eat it. We need that stick to get shorter, and we need to get these things done. They are in front of this committee and our subcommittees right now.
So thanks, Deb, for that, and thanks, Ed. So what would that direction look like? I mean, do we need to go subcommittee by subcommittee? You see their current goal statements on the the list here on that presentation. They're high level. They're not. They are quite different across them. And then, in addition to the goal statements, it seems like you want to identify and be clear about actual specific work products and timelines.
Well, I think clear expectations for them. It seems like that is a reoccurring thing from the subcommittees of, what work do we want them to do, and what is that timeline? I mean, not being open-ended, but having something to shoot for. They, if we are asking them to do specific things, I think that's important.
Well, I might look to Rick and ask what the Yellowstone subcommittee needs from this table to keep some traction moving on that conservation strategy.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. So I'll throw this out as an example. I like the idea of going subcommittee by subcommittee and have this group provide some very specific direction for subcommittees to work on. And so I'd offer up, in terms of the yes committee, what that would look like, at least from my standpoint, is that this group direct the yes subcommittee do
Speak
a
up.
couple of things.
Sorry, Jennifer can't hear. Yeah.
So how about now? Can you hear me okay? Can you move that out?
Yeah.
I don't have my.
It doesn't
I
move.
could just repeat everything that Rick said.
It doesn't move very far because it's the cord is only so long.
Yeah, you could maybe, that might be the easiest.
There we go.
All right, can you guys hear me okay now?
Get right down next to it.
Yeah, no.
You can sit and look less awkward.
Okay, so my recommendation is that I think we could go subcommittee by subcommittee and, yeah, this is awkward. Provide some recommendations to each subcommittee from this executive group. And I'll use yes as an example. I think there's a couple of very specific directions that this group ought to give the yes subcommittee. And these recommendations are in line with, the charter and purpose of both the executive committee and the yes subcommittee. So my recommendation would be pretty specific. Number one, I recommend that we direct yes to pull a small team together to evaluate the recommendations that were made at the July 1 meeting to update the conservation strategy, to review those recommendations, and then to come back before September 1, reconvene before September 1, the yes subcommittee, and move forward with updating the conservation strategy and report back to this meeting that that's been done. So just to clarify, a small team of the yes subcommittee to review the recommended updates to the conservation strategy and to reconvene the yes subcommittee before September 1 to move forward with the updates to the conservation strategy. Just a little bit of background and clarification. I think that at the meeting that was held, the YES subcommittee meeting that was held last Friday, I think there was a lot of confusion, a lot of questions about some specifics in the recommended updates to the conservation strategy. And I think really if a small team of folks that have been highly engaged in those issues can come together, we can provide enough clarity to the rest of the group to move forward with those conservation strategy updates.
Jennifer has her hand up.
Okay,
Thanks.
and-
Hey,
Sorry.
can I ask a question? Or should I wait?
I just wanted to clarify, I can't pull it up on my phone. There's a currently scheduled YES meeting. I think is it November? So, yeah, just wanted to make sure that was clear in terms of timeline.
Yeah, just to clarify, I don't want to wait. I think
Yeah.
we can get this done before then.
Got it. Okay.
So by September 1.
Jennifer.
So my clarifying question, Rick, is, on that yes call, which I was a part of representing Yellowstone, I believe the recommendation was that we were going to ask IGBST to do a demographic workshop as we continue to work through the revisions to Chapter 2, the demographics chapter, and the revised CHOW 2. I just want to make sure I'm understanding what your perspective is and understanding is of the recommendations as well. That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so just to clarify, the YES committee did talk about having a demographic workshop later this winter, but I don't think that we need to wait until that is done to move forward with some conservation strategy updates. I think that, again, a small group of folks that have been highly engaged in these issues can convene and talk through some of the questions and concerns and bring back a recommendation to use before September 1 to get those updates done. And in terms of the demographic workshop, my recommendation is that conservation strategy updates can be done prior to the demographic workshop. The demographic workshop should be done. I fully support that. And if there are changes and recommendations that come out of that demographic workshop, we can reconvene, circle back, and update the conservation strategy. I don't think we need to wait until that is done to move forward.
And by move forward, do you mean vote on the conservation strategy at the YES subcommittee level, or do you mean just make draft changes prior to a vote?
I mean bring forward a recommendation from YES to the IGBC to make updates to the conservation strategy. So yes, vote.
I'll have to go back to the notes, but I don't think that the YES subcommittee did not agree on that point, if I recall. And I don't want, we can go offline on this, but I believe there was a vote at the YES subcommittee and we did not agree to move forward the conservation strategy changes to IGBC exec team until I don't know if it was before or after the demographic workshop, and maybe Frank, you can weigh in, and maybe we're digressing here and this isn't the appropriate time for this, but in regard to Chapter 3, I think that's fine. I think we all voted that we're good with that, but it's Chapter 2 that is the point of disagreement here. So if we need to move this offline, we can, but I was at that meeting. Frank, you were at that meeting as well, and it did not pass to move the changes to the proposed changes to the conservation strategy to the exec team at this time.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And so I guess the flip side of that is that the IGBC executive committee oversees and provides direction to the YES subcommittee. So my recommendation is that this executive committee charge YES with moving forward and not vice versa. I understand the conversation that happened at YES, but I think it's the IGBC executive committee responsibility to provide direction to YES. So that's what I'm asking for, is that the executive committee today provide direction to YES. And if I make some of that direction that you're talking about is convening a small group to flesh out those details that Jennifer's talking about.
And I would encourage, I haven't, I think Jennifer, you could be a part of that small team. Like I said, I think there are a handful of folks who've been highly engaged in working through some of those questions that were brought up on Friday's meeting. And I think that small team getting together will be very productive.
I guess the question, Rick, maybe you can relay this if folks can't hear it, I'll speak up, but to me, there's a difference in telling, are we directing them to vote to pass it, or are we directing them to engage on it? Because my understanding is, having not been there, so recognize I don't probably know all the details, is there is some concern about that 600 number and whether or not that fully meets recalibration. So are you hoping that that would be resolved? Can that be resolved before this demographic workshop?
I think it can, and that hence my recommendation for direction for IGBC Executive Committee to provide direction, to pull together a small team to work through the issues that were brought forward with the in the current draft of the updates to the conservation strategy, and to get that done before September 1st.
So I understand where you're coming from, Rick, and I like the idea of getting this small working group together. I guess where my concern lies is voting or moving the conservation strategy forward for an approval vote for IGBC before a demographic workshop. Because if we're just going to go back and change it based on the demographic workshop, why don't we wait until the demographic workshop before moving it up to IGBC instead of having to do it twice?
Yeah, my recommendation is that I think a small team of folks can get together and resolve many of these issues. And I'm fairly confident that if we did that, I think that folks would feel a lot more comfortable moving forward rather than continuing to wait.
Yeah, and let me just, so there's a substantive piece here, and then there's a procedural piece. And the interest that I hear you expressing, Rick, is, the conservation strategies, and I'll say plural, NCDE is in a similar situation of, there have been some minor edits since 2018. Right. There was an approval process then, there were signatures. Or yes, that was 2016. Yes, it had not made any changes until April, when the Chapter 3 changes were agreed to, which brought this question forward of, what else do we need to fix up and get ready? We want this document in a state of preparation to be ready. And that's sort of the question is how do we look at the whole thing and make sure that it's up to date, if you will? Is that a fair statement? And so the expression from the executive committee is, hey, that's an important work product, that conservation strategy. Make sure that it's in a state of readiness, get it up to date. And the timing of that and the details of that obviously are now what you're discussing. So I just wanted to see if I could connect the dots. Because it is, and maybe Ken, I don't want to zoom out because you've got a motion here, Rick, but how does this relate, Ken, or others, to this question of when and if, and how to keep track of edits and updates in the NCDE as well?
Yeah, the NCDE, Scott, you can help me. But we're sort of have a running tally of edits.
Mm-hmm.
To date, they haven't been super significant. For a week, they're in there to fix it. And at some point, the committee will say or adopt all these edits and then just revise the data and adopt them. So it's a little different than this one where the also that was recalibration was the big piece of the change. And that was one of the things. We stick to point and point just obviously they've been with the works of the study team recalibration of the population numbers, chapter 2 in Yellowstone. The states, the 3 states have incorporated those changes in the tri-state MOU that all of our agencies and commissions have signed. So the concern I have right now is we have two standards out there. We have the tri-state MOA that's incorporated with best available science, and we have the conservation strategy that does not. And my objective would be to get that conservation strategy, the parts that are done now with this recalibration, incorporate that and adopt it. So that we're working on one set of numbers, and then as additional changes come along, there's a process for incorporating those. And if the mortality thresholds change, or chapter 5 changes, we have the ability to continually adapt and incorporate new science and new information. But this recalibration, that was a giant step forward. But my objective would be to get that adopted in the conservation strategy, and then all the agencies start using those numbers going forward.
Thank you. That's very helpful background, and that's consistent with what Rick has proposed. So again, the motion is small group working by September 1, so July, August. That's a quick turnaround. And I'm going to recognize folks with hands up. So Hugh.
I'm certainly willing to go. I don't know if Jennifer was maybe ahead of me. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I didn't see the order.
No, Hugh, you can go first.
Well, so no, I appreciate this conversation, and I'm still relatively new to this committee, but it seems to me that that expectation is that the individual subcommittees work through these types of conversations and develop consensus and a plan to move forward within the subcommittee. I guess I'd be concerned with a precedent of the executive committee dictating timeframes and work plans for the individual subcommittees. I don't know if that's something that has happened in the past, but to me, it is a questionable precedent for us to be dictating that kind of detail of the subcommittees.
Yeah. So Ken's going to have a thought on that.
I was just gonna say, if you look at the current 5-year plan, all throughout that, we dictate that.
Yeah.
Do this by this thing.
Yeah.
So we haven't followed it to any extent, but that's right.
Can you hear that, Hugh?
Yes.
Could you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And in this case, it ties into this higher level mission area for the committee of delisting, where the current strategy is uncertain. Jennifer.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with moving forward as suggested. My only concern and caveat is that it's not going to be a final draft, so to speak, if we work on those numbers by September 1st, as Rick suggests, and then we have this demographic workshop and those numbers need to be revised. But I'm willing to go with the flow and see what happens with this small working group and work it out in that regard. I don't think that it's wise for us to vote and say, yes, subcommittee, you need to have a final conservation strategy to us by December, if that's what this is implying.
And then Frank's.
Yeah.
Frank.
So I want to get to Frank, and I've got to recognize Ed, but I just want to make sure, Ed, you heard what Jennifer just said.
And I think if I could just make a comment before, because I would look to Frank to make sure that I'm right. So I think we're gaining some momentum here. I just first say, Hugh, I have to disagree. We that's our job to set expectations and timelines. I don't think it's dictating an outcome. I think it's establishing an expectation to get these things done. I think it's a reasonable period of time. So I'm in support. I think that not waiting, because these are the things that require some continuing education of newer members on the yes committee that don't have the history maybe of how all the pieces and parts work. But the outcome of the demographic workshop is an update to rates and ratios, and it is a mathematical outcome that plugs into a table that gets updated. I don't see the outcome of a demographic workshop as this contentious thing that we need to find consensus about. It's rates and ratio, and it updates a table. And so I just offer that at this point, knowing that Frank's got his hand up, and I think that's, if we can get all this other stuff done, the outcome of that demographic workshop is a plug in the numbers into the chart in chapter 2 piece, and it is very rudimentary update to that rates and ratio table.
Frank.
So speaking to that, what we've done so far, is updating the numbers, is what we've done so far. That was just pretty technical update of the numbers in the conservation strategy. I think to respond to Ed, the demographic workshop would be a little bit more than that, and could present a different view of how to approach things. And I say that because there's other changes coming up. For example, we've reported to you on the integrated population modeling. We're doing that in Yellowstone. The NCDE is doing that as well. So there could be further changes to the conservation strategy. And so what I would advocate, and I think this is what Ken was reflecting, is that whichever process you choose, it should allow, as long as it allows for additional updates to the conservation strategy, and whichever way is the most efficient way of doing that. But unfortunately, our science is not always in sync with decision-making and making changes to the conservation strategy. That's unfortunate, but that's just a reality. But as long as the process allows for those changes and updates to be made, some are just technical updates of numbers, some may be more than that. And as long as the process allows that, then I think we're on the right path.
That sounds fair, Frank.
Yeah, Jennifer, I was going to go back to your sort of sequencing question.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I was just worried, like, we're going to vote on it and that's that. If there's a way that we can incorporate revisions both to the number side and to whatever that portends based on the numbers in terms of management, and if we can allow those revisions to continue to take place, I think that's fine. So I'm willing to move forward.
Second.
Just a question on process. So what the executive committee is directing the S to do is to try to resolve this by September 1. Right?
Or convene by.
Convene a small team.
Okay.
To address the concerns that were brought up last week.
To present at the.
And to reconvene the yes group to present those findings from the small team by September.
Yes, to the yes.
Oh, geez, yeah. And the form that would take would be an updated draft.
So that is the motion.
Yes.
And you second.
I seconded.
You seconded.
So again, just with the sequencing, I'm trying to, so that means the small group meets in July. The yes meets in August. and now we have an updated, a draft that reflects the current state of play. There's a demographic workshop at some point in maybe October, Frank?
We're probably more looking at November, because a lot of work has to be done before that workshop on our
Okay.
end, the analysis.
There's another in-person yes meeting in November. And then this executive group meets in December. And so we'll have, at every step after September 1, we'll have this existing draft that's available. And I guess, is there, I guess this is the, do you want at the yes meeting in August or November, you want sort of approval of that, or as a standing draft, as an updated? We have this question of the form that edits take. So Ken mentioned for NCDE was keeping this running list. Do you have a thought on how to do that? Or just, do we post, like, what do we, how do we keep track of this update?
Well, again, I think to be in line with Jennifer's concerns, but my ask is simply for a small team to reconvene to address the issues that were brought up last week. And then to reconvene the yes meeting, the yes committee before September 1, to relay those findings and concerns. And then the yes committee can at that point make a decision as to whether or not they're comfortable updating the conservation strategy, knowing that there will be a demographic workshop coming up where further revisions could be made. And after the demographic workshop is done, those recommendations come forward. Yes, would reconvene, review those, update the conservation strategy as necessary. And if all that happens before December, great. So the yes committee would potentially be ready to come to the December IGBC with an updated draft. That'd be my ideal timeline.
And for clarity though, but you're asking, or it would be the executive committee directing or giving the expectation to the yes committee, or the yes committee and members of, to take this forward.
Right. And my thought is that we, by laying out this process, one, we're providing clear direction to yes, and number two, we're directing it in a manner that's a small chunk at a time. It doesn't all have to be, we don't have to wait till everything is potentially done and evaluated. We can work on this piecemeal, piece by piece, which I think is easier than waiting for some future date.
So thanks again for that clarification and specificity. Any other thoughts about that? Questions, or are we ready to make a motion on that?
I have a motion and a second.
In a second. So are you ready? So is that, are you people ready? And I guess the one other question I would have is the constitution of the small group. That's a matter for the yes chair to.
Who is the yes chair? Is it just changed?
You're on.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's understood, that he'll work with the group and figure out who the right people are. Okay. Motion.
Second.
Any opposed to this action for you? Yes, and really, I think the shift here is we have an expectation now that having many years passed from the production of the initial conservation strategies, we need to have them to reflect the current state of science and management, and in the state of readiness. So what I will do then is capture this action item, and again, so any opposed to that, and seeing none, we'll adopt that as an action. And what I'll do is we'll create the action items coming out of this meeting and forward them to the yes chair for action. So, and again, that's consistent with their 5-year plan, with their goals of successful transition. And the question that was raised by the fact that we did go back to the, we need to be updating this thing. Chapter 3 is now fixed. Chapter 2 is is now on a path. So that's yes.
Yeah.
Anything else for yes?
I guess I would take a step back. That's a one thing for you.
Yeah.
Look at the current thing, it was assuming your transition. And obviously that didn't happen. What we need to do is continue to, but we need to have a yes to, continue to implement those actions to make them ready for.
I can't hear you. Sorry. You have to go sit up there. He's moving closer, Jennifer.
So yes, needs to continue to implement actions that prepare for delisting. To me, part of, and this is one of the sketchy things with conservation strategy, because those are intended to be a post-delisting management plans. But really the conservation strategy is what we're using to kind of guide and evaluate our recovery actions as well. So things like the recalibrated numbers, you know, are we meeting those, the objectives in the demographic chapter? Are we meeting the objectives in the habitat chapter? So you know, my recommendation would be to the yes committee is you know, implement the applicable portions of the conservation strategy and report back on, are we doing what we said we would do? The connectivity piece is in the current documents. That one's getting to be a little more controversial. You know, bears, sort of that explained, as bears are expanding in all directions, but you know, maybe there is a goal for VS to address both you know, distribution and expansion. And then obviously the other pieces, you know, I guess it is sort of continue the efforts we've been doing, but you know, minimizing conflict, maintaining support, addressing livestock depredations, things like that. And that's just me thinking on the top of my head, but you know, that's the kind of stuff I would like to see is, let's be real specific. And then when they come back in December and report, it's, well, we have these charges from you guys, here's what we've done to address these charges.
Great, appreciate that. And your history here and understanding how we, you know, we have worked, could work, may work. And that's helpful. So, and that, you know, I think I tried to capture what you said, and we'll put this in the notes. So I guess the one question is it, here's the list, or is it an invitation to, you know, they may have a, you know, may have a slightly different take on conflict or a slightly different take on habitat. You know, is it a back and forth, or is it a, here's the priority, or here's the goal?
Yeah, good question. I think that for Yellowstone, the conservation strategy really lays those things out.
Yeah.
And that's where I tried to get us in the short period we were delisted, is the role of the ecosystem committee is report back on, are we doing these things in the conservation strategy? And I think there's demographics, there's habitat, there's INE, there's conflict, and there's recommendations under each of those headings.
Sounds like a pretty good annual report.
Yeah. It actually goes pretty quick.
Yep. Okay. So any other thoughts for the Yellowstone Ecosystem Subcommittee? Hearing Ken's suggestions for them.
The only other thing I would offer up or just ask of the service, is there anything that IGBC or ES can or should do to help remnant analysis for UID? Help can you provide there? Service need?
You know, bounce off your plants and send it right back to Hillary.
I don't think right now. Right now. Yeah, that's a DPS now.
My question on that one, I brought it up as well, is remnant analysis specific to an ecosystem? Or is that a higher level range wide thing that needs to happen?
What he said.
Yes.
They can't.
So the question Ken just asked is the remnant analysis an ecosystem specific activity or something that's a range wide?
Well, I think that remnant to us, I think means we have a lower 48 entity. If we change that in any way, we have to, whatever is left, the remnant has to be a species. In other words, it has to be one or more DPSs. So to me, it is range wide.
So with that said, and your answer, Rick, that you currently don't need anything from the subcommittee, I take that to mean the remnant analysis is well at hand and moving along well, and we could expect that to be done in a timely fashion.
What's Hillary's priority?
But I'll take it. So, I'm from here, so Jennifer and I was trying to like they're flying a plane. So, I think that's the hard part. I mean, you know, we came together, you're going suggested a recovery plan revision. Didn't seem there was a lot of support for that, notwithstanding the fact that it's been in the IGBC work plan for, what did you say, Ken, 5 years? So if we're gonna stick with the existing recovery plan, the remnant analysis potentially looks different than if we went with a different recovery plan or a different paradigm. But that said, we will do it. I mean, we will do the remnant analysis. It's just a little complicated now that we've got 3 separate petitions, including the Idaho one that talks about delisting the entire entity. So that's what we're struggling. But yes, we are working on it. Yes, we will move it as quickly as possible. It's just a bit complex.
But you don't need any help.
Not right now.
Okay. So, thanks, Matt. Thinking back to the conversations that we had about recovery plan rewrite, that was really more of a dichotomous key as it was presented to us. The service has the resources to do either recovery plan rewrite or take up the issues of the deficiencies in the Yellowstone delisting and the remnant analysis. And which would you rather us do? And that guy particularly got tasked with Wyoming's notification of intent to petition for delisting of the GYE. And Montana got in front of that with their petition, and then Idaho followed up with kind of gather up all the stuff petition to follow. So to me, it's still a question of the resources, right? The service doesn't have enough resources to do both. Which one would you all agree would be better to do? And now here you are with a very complex situation. And I don't know that you've got any more resources, so we're asking you, what do you need? And the answer is, we got this. So
I think, yeah, no, good summary. I think that the complexity here, in my mind anyway, and I'm not, as I said yesterday, I am far from the smartest person hear from the Fish and Wildlife Service on the ESA and the intricacies of it. And frankly, even the people who do it for a living struggle with some of the nuances here because of all kinds of things, including court decisions and precedents, et cetera. I'm a simplistic thinker. To me, it's with every time we quote unquote pick off a DPS and delist it, we're kind of committing to the current paradigm, which talks about 6 recovery areas with a certain number of bears in each, and each one gets recovered when it reaches those numbers. I think there's a number of people who think we need to revisit that paradigm, right? And say, is that really the right paradigm almost 40 years later to say we need X number of bears and Y number of recovery areas equals delisted? Particularly because those recovery areas were set up before there was anything, they didn't have DPSs, right? So we're trying to match the past to the present. So to me, it seems like it would have been easier, although longer, to tell the story, so to speak, of grizzly bear conservation and what recovery and ultimately delisting looks like for the listed entity. It might have helped us tell that story a little better if we revisited the recovery plan. It's not required. We can work on it at the same time we move through the DPSs. I get exactly where Rick is coming from Wyoming standpoint. We've tried twice. He's sick of coming to these meetings, so he just wants to
You still have the camera. Sorry.
I'm trying to get you off this, Rick. So anyway, so I think at some point, yes, we're going to need to have a conversation about the remnant analysis. I just don't think we're at the point right now where we need anything specifically from the subcommittee. At some point, we will come back and probably need something, whether it's from any one of the subcommittees or the larger IGBC. I don't think we can articulate what that is today. But it is a priority for us. And it's not something that we haven't been giving thought to, honestly, since the 9th Circuit decision and the preceding decision by the Montana District Court. So. I dismissed.
You may return to your seat.
Is it possible to tack on to that? Sorry for the words with the deadline and then analysis by December meeting.
So is there a motion or are we just talking or what's the status?
Well, we were talking about Yellowstone.
Oh, we got Yellowstone done
And
though.
then this was
Well, then the question was, is it a Yellowstone action? This is something that we know we need for Yellowstone, but and then the question was range wide, and then we got the broader context there from Matt, and you're now asking what's next?
So,
Or timeline.
so as much as I would like to think this table has the authority to set timelines for the Fish and Wildlife Service to do their work,
Probably not.
I think the charter says that we don't. And unless the remnant analysis is actually a product of the subcommittees and the executive committee, I don't think we're in a position to set a timeline to tell the Fish and Wildlife Service to have the remnant. I wish we were, but
make a recommendation.
we can make a recommendation. Absolutely, but I think those timelines are set by the director. Director, I have to appreciate.
So you don't want them telling you, Ed.
Well, the charter says they can't, so we're all autonomous in the work that we do, and we're here, we're collaboratively on conservation, so we'd like y'all to get on with it, though.
My question was answered.
Okay, so I guess I'm seeing some people getting up, moving around. We've been going for 2 straight hours. I think maybe it would make sense to do the 10 o'clock break. And what we still have on the table then is we've talked about one subcommittee. We can look at this list and think about similar and maybe in the way that Ken did of, hey, what are the, Ken's suggestion was that for Yellowstone, everything is through the lens of status of progress in areas articulated in the conservation strategy. So we may have an opportunity to do that for NCDE, and then there's maybe some other conversations in other places. And then we do need to come back to the overarching IGBC workflows. IEO again wants to do regional, getting the best messages possible, using the best social science, using the resources most effectively. We have the science discussion that we haven't had sort of a range-wide report on science in a while, and then we have this question about, is there something that you want to do as a group on conflict that's separated from the local geographies and is looking more at tools and resources at the regional scale. So that's what I see still to come, but I do think it's time for a break. So can we reconvene at 10:15 Pacific?
Or just in 15 minutes for all of you in different time zones. Just 15 minutes.
Thanks, Jack.
Keep it simple.
Thank you. I'm done.
Okay.
Yeah, there's.
I'll see if that helped. Oh. They're all gone. We can see them.
So Ruth, can you hear us better? Because we changed the microphone to the owl, so. Curious.
Yes.
Although Lori, you guys up front weren't really the issue. It's the side folks.
Here, Ken.
Can you hear Rick now?
We'll have folks
Yes.
come forward.
Better.
Yeah, we'll have folks come forward. Or you upped it?
We changed it. We were on this microphone and not that microphone.
Oh, well,
Yeah,
that would make
I
a
know.
That would
difference.
be user error.
Yeah, user error. Chris Savage saved us. So,
So we don't have to get sworn in and when we come in front.
You don't have to be
Raise your
sworn
right hand
in.
and repeat after
Yeah,
me.
you don't have to get sworn in.
So-
Get called to the chair, you're
Yeah.
in trouble.
Very earnest though.
so did you hear Matt then, Jennifer, just now? Oh yeah, they say that's a lot better. Okay, perfect.
Okay, yeah, so my apologies. I'm learning to work well with owls.
Okay.
Recovering,
skill.
we're recovering the owl.
Thanks, folks. So we're reconvening now, and again, we were in the middle. We've got, we're trying to capture some of the notes, and what I think we'll do before adjourning is go back and make sure we go over those and have those captured properly. But right now, we've got the continuation of discussion about subcommittee direction. The overarching direction is going to be to revisit the 5-year plan, and we'll have a template for the annual report in December. But we just did sort of a tactical adjustment for Yellowstone to keep the conservation strategy up to date, to do new revisions to the 2016 version. And so the question now is there any similar direction needed in the other subcommittees?
So we would open it up.
You know, for the Northern Continental Divide, it's almost the same, because we do have a well-developed conservation strategy that outlines demographic objectives, outlines needs, issues, conflict, those kinds of things. I think as much as anything, it's implement the applicable portions or that, how we do it.
The other thing I would add to that is because the conservation strategy, as you guys were mentioning, the NCDE has some changes, revisions to it. It'd be nice to bring forward what those are. And, I mean, I guess it depends on how changing they are. If we're just talking about, periods and commas, I don't think this group cares about that, but if there's something,
Substantive.
yes, thank you, that's substantive. We need to have this report back.
I think, as you mentioned, Ken, having that defined process for reporting changes and keeping updates to strategies current, I think would add a lot of clarity to the several uses.
Yeah, and so that actually can I ask a clarifying question on this revision process? So as has been happening with NCDE, they've had minor edits that they've kept track of that they viewed as minor, and we've got a notational way of keeping track of that. With Yellowstone, the chapter 3 changes, were significant, and were applicable now as opposed to post delisting. What form should these I guess the real question is when are signatures necessary? It's only been at the point at which you're sort of at the end, it's the last step. And what we're talking about is actually keeping track of edits as we go. Almost like it's a discussion draft until then there's a finalization. Am I being too bureaucratic?
From my perspective, the actual signature piece is probably important, kind of coinciding with the proposed delisting. Prior to that, if changes and we vote, we have a record of the vote, but we have to changes. I think that's fine. That's probably makes us more bulletproof to have a signature anytime.
That's a helpful distinction, voting in this body versus signatures by directors, regional directors.
So do we have a motion or we just?
That was clear. I'm just trying as a staff. So again, I'm one staff person at the IGBC. The subcommittees don't have staff support. I am participating in subcommittees and hope to be useful. And these conservation strategies are some of the most important products of this enterprise, this IGBC enterprise. So in my role is in maintaining the website and this interface, I get questions about what's the latest of the, I just want to make sure we label things appropriately and keep up the work here and are clear and transparent. So that was helpful. So the motion though, Ken, was direction NCDE to continue implementing the applicable portions of their conservation strategy.
Okay, and Jody, what did you say though about being substantive or capturing?
I was saying as part of the 5-year direction for the NCDE, that we know like what's coming on those updates and revisions when they're substantial. But I like, yeah, just as a regular occurring kind of report back to this group.
So identification of any substantive changes reported regularly to the executive committee.
So for instance, for GYE, it took them several years to deal with the habitat issue. That we're working on that. That was something that I don't think was identified on this 5-year plan, but certainly could have been and should have been. So that's what I'm.
For us. Yeah, okay. So however we can capture, I like that because I think that keeps everybody copacetic and on the same page.
If I might, there's a little nuance. Thanks, Ken, for setting that up with the proposed rule. I think that conservation strategy was actually signed final rule. I think the conservation strategy was part of the public comment and review. So the conservation strategy does not have to have its own standalone public comment and review as part of the proposed rule. It receives that and then it is signed by the executives at the time of the final rule. Right, and I think that's an important understanding of how the pieces and parts go through the process.
That's a good clarification.
So I can answer the question. Then that would be the service doing public comment on the rule and strategy at the same time.
I'll just wait. We did not do that for NCD because we were not doing a proposal.
Right.
We did that a separate way. So everything's different for GY.
Things different. We haven't had a proposed rule for TDE. So as the conversation was really pertinent to occurrence with a rule, with a proposed delisting rule, when that happens, it's always time to make sure the conservation strategy reflects the best available science and that it's updated so that there aren't any angry chads come final rule times. So I think that's important, right? And I think that gets back to the very good conversation that we had, and thanks for having that conversation about the GYE. I want to make sure that we understand that these conservation strategies should be updated to the best of our ability at any given time. And to wait to say, oh, well, we can't update the conservation strategy right now because we might have an IPM in the next few months and well better informed to update the conservation strategy when and if we get this next piece of best available science. Well, when we get it, then we'll update it, but we're not just gonna sit at idle in the intersection waiting for that next, but these conservation strategies need to be current for the best available science at the time they're being evaluated for. And we have suffered from that before in sitting at idle, sitting in neutral, waiting for the next thing. Sometimes the next thing comes and sometimes the next thing languishes for exorbitant periods of time. And so it is the best available at the time. And so I think when we update this one, we'll really look forward to that workshop and the outcome of that workshop and the important parts that will refresh that strategy. So these are good things as we talk about the value of these conservation strategies in our relationship, in our executive relationship with the subcommittees and work plans and advancing the conservation of grizzly bears. And I think if there's a transition point here from the NCDE to the Cabinet YAC, we need a conservation strategy. And so I think the ask of this table, based on the things that Idaho, particularly, and other members of this committee have brought forth in the last few years about not having finalized demographic criteria or habitat criteria or the necessary elements to create a conservation strategy for the Cabinet Yaak and Selkirk recovery areas. That's glaringly absent from our ability to have a meaningful executive relationship with that subcommittee on checks and balances and getting things done. So I want to identify that, right, to that subcommittee, that we need those elements. We need the directed work toward having the necessary elements to create this roadmap to success in the Cabinet Yaak and Selkirk. It's just been far too long, and it needs to get done.
So then is there a motion? And how we don't really have a motion yet, right? So here you saying something similar to yes, but it's not as, Rick had really distinct, clean, a thing to go.
So you, excuse me
No,
for
sir.
interrupting you,
No.
but last night you talked about in the next 30 days, we need to figure out how to do this, right? And so I would think that in the next 30 days, Rick kind of did this, just let's identify the steps needed in the schedule for. Right, we're not gonna get this done in a year, but we need to set a course for the Selkirk and the Cabinet Yaak to assemble all the pieces necessary to have a conservation strategy that can be updated. We don't even have that yet. So whatever, if that's a subgroup of the Selkirk Cabinet Yaak subcommittee that can identify the steps in the schedule, give us something as executives to sink our teeth into in a plan forward so that we can get these pieces and at least have something to reflect to the public that there's a plan, there's a path. These are the things we need. That's my motion in a very roundabout way.
So if I can, add some clarity. So I was talking to Ed about what we talked about at the end of yesterday and how could we do work to align us or have clarity about what are the options? So this was the option conversation of like, what are the options, or avenues, potential avenues to move us forward on something. And so we talked, so what I was sharing with him, because he wasn't with us yesterday, was some of that discussion around, should we put a small group together to within, a short time period to come to figure out, like, Matt, what we talked about of, you have and Hillary, like the recovery plan option, or do we do the chapter option? And then what do we think about the time? But to flesh that out, to then come back to the executive committee to kind of then present maybe at a special meeting in September or October before December of here's the options or the different paths and what do you think? So that was what I was talking to Ed about last night, of the continuation of that discussion. And for all of you that were not, with us yesterday, that was some of the meatier pieces that we got into while we were sitting after lunch in the afternoon, kind of talking through that.
And then from that, Jackie, what Ed is describing is more of in line with what we did with
Yes.
and CDE.
Yes.
For Selkirk Cabinet Yak. So let me recognize Hannah.
Thank
And then
you.
Joe.
Just maybe I'm not sure if it's a question or a friendly amendment around I hear, assemble the pieces, right, to get us towards a conservation strategy. I'm assuming that there are some, this is my question, are there barriers to achieving those pieces? As it's not just an assembling, right? Of the things that are there are some, and maybe that's what you're saying, Ed, is that there are steps and pieces that need to be collected to be able to assemble. So what are the barriers, I think would be the addition. What are the barriers to achieving that end of a conservation strategy?
We talked about that too, Hannah, yesterday.
So sorry to jump in. Christy is here representing the chair.
Oh, good.
So please.
Thank you. So I actually very much agree with Ed that we need a conservation strategy in our ecosystem, and I want to bring that forward to Ben Connor. I also think the meeting that Fish and Wildlife Service and Fish and Game have set up will be very instructive in moving forward with that conservation strategy. And I'll double check with Ben, but from Fish and Wildlife Service side, I think we should be reporting back out to the executive committee once we have this joint meeting, where we're heading and how we're proposing to move forward with the conservation strategy. That's okay with you, Ed, but that's what I'd like to put forward from our subcommittee to Ben and to the group.
When is the meeting?
I'm sorry, I clicked on it. Yeah, it's in the fall right now. September was when we were talking about it. I think the end of September. So we can definitely have a report by December. But if we need to report out before then, I think we can make that work, but I want to check with Ben.
So Jody, maybe help me on this one too. So we have those forests have a biological opinion to meet standards for those BMUs. How, and not all BMUs are up to standard. How do we, and granted, yeah, conservation strategy takes time to create. Do you see any conflict there where are we getting too far ahead to develop a conservation strategy when we're still not meeting terms and conditions of the biological opinion? Or because it's not any fault of the Forest Service, it's just those terms and conditions have been held up. There was, from the mines, the BOs from the mines are gonna put those BMUs in place. Hasn't happened. On the Idaho Panhandle side, you've got the private timberlands that keep moving the goalpost. So I guess my other question would be, can the conservation strategy amend or look at ways of differently trying to get those BMUs up to standard and not having them be competitive or conflicting with one another.
So I'm gonna start and I'm gonna turn over to Christy. The conservation strategy is a plan for what happens once we delist
Right.
the ecosystem, right? So I think there is flexibility there in how we move forward with that. And I don't think it's maybe early, but maybe not that early to do so. And I think what Christy was talking about was the group has got like an idea of a plan on how that might look, and that's what they want to come forward back to us with.
That's correct. So I totally agree, and I held your comment from yesterday too, Chris, that we have to keep the forest plan in mind. One of the challenges that we have is we have the section 7 component and we have a conservation component. And we may have to do something either in parallel, but we should not have a conflicting situation. So that has to be part of our conversation. So I think we need to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
And I don't see it as being a barrier, but a very important consideration. And these are some things we need to talk about so that we don't have an unintended consequence.
Sure.
When we put forward conservation measures. But I think it's just valuable to have the conversation. And what I'm hoping is we end up reflecting the good work that Forest Service has done and being able to further acknowledge the efforts that have been made to reach those BMU targets. And I think that will actually reinforce us in court too, but that's a whole other conversation. But that's how I see this playing out right now. I don't have any defined steps, but I think it's important to have that conversation.
Thank you.
No, she wants to talk. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Just can't see her.
Is Jennifer Carpenter there? It looks like there was a comment in the comments.
No, that's Jennifer Fortenorius.
No, but. Jennifer Carpenter says, I have a question for the execs on what they want to see. Okay.
I don't have any questions. I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Who's your again? Secretary Air.
Hybrid is complicated.
Yes.
We'll say that. We want to make sure we're bringing all voices in. So again, so Ed's motion here is direction to the Cabinet Yak and Selkirk subcommittees to
identify the steps needed in a schedule for development of a conservation strategy.
I'll second.
And I think appropriately, Hannah added the kind of the barrier thing. And I think that's one of the first things, Christy, that we're discussing in our meetings is what are those barriers, and to Chris's conversation, the challenges of where we sit with biological opinions, all of that is layered in this as we contemplate a path forward for conservation strategy, and really a document that helps this executive committee interact in a meaningful way with the subcommittee on direction and priority and timing.
No, you go ahead.
Is that the right? Is that up there correct, Ed? That is steps at a time, right? These subcommittees to move forward with the conservation strategy.
Development of the conservation.
Okay, so I'm going to again, we feel like we've talked this one through, so I'm going to put it in the reverse. Are there any opposed?
Need a second.
Oh,
A second.
Oh,
I'll second. Yeah.
Chris
Third.
second. Chris second.
Second and third.
Thank you for that. And now I'll ask if are any opposed? I see none, and so we'll adopt that. And again, this is connected to basically a higher level direction this group is setting, which is again, a reinforcement of the centrality of those conservation strategies. And yeah.
The question is, just because I'm ignorant about it, is are you envisioning the conservation strategy, single strategy that covers Cabinet Selkirk? The Cabinet line, Selkirk? Or is that to be determined?
Yeah, I hope we actually have a single strategy. But let's, yeah, we need the discussion to see what makes sense.
Clarifying question of, so we're taking these notes and then how will we convey this back to, because it really shouldn't even come from Rick, it should come from the executive committee, I mean, or back, but what is the avenue for us then sending this to so we send it to the chair of the subcommittees? And how, because we haven't really done anything quite like this.
Yeah, so, thank you for that question. Again, I'm the one employee of IGBC, and what I was thinking, and again, it started this morning with the Yellowstone discussion, is that I would transmit, that I want to make sure we leave here having looked at this on the screen and be crystal clear on what the direction is, because then I can be the messenger and transmit that to each of the subcommittee chairs. And I'm also thinking what I might do is try to bring the subcommittee chairs together and talk to them.
I was gonna say, would it be helpful to have a call?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
maybe I can even join with you.
That would be great. In fact, that's another action. Let's get that.
I just, I think when we're taking a different approach, if we're engaging in a different way, I want to be thoughtful about it too, and not, and give them their, asking them to do stuff, so I want to give them their due.
Of course, they are doing things.
Yeah.
And really, I think we're hopefully going to be able to have a more productive alignment. And as Ken was saying, progress to plan and be maybe more efficient even in the reporting process that we go through each year in December.
I would recommend, sort of talking at the high level here.
Yeah.
Implement applicable portions of conservation strategy for habitat needs, demographic needs. IND needs. They're easy to, you have to kind of lay it out there, so this is what we're expecting.
So we'll do a review on the screen, but then we'll also send these out before we do the contact with subcommittees, just have everyone put eyes to them and make sure that what we have captured is everything that needs to be.
And one, again, this is one thought I have for the initial step of this in December with the subcommittees is particularly for YES and NCDE. Before reporting on progress to that plan, maybe they spend a little more time with this executive group describing their plan. Yeah, a reminder of a refresher of here are the components of this conservation strategy. Here are the places I think, Jody, you were mentioning that have changed or need to change. And then here's how we're doing it. Okay, thanks for that. That was a helpful addition. So Selkirk, so we've got Selkirk Cabinet. So any other, sort of near-term tactical redirection for other subcommittees? The two on the table still are Bitterroot and North Cascades, which are in a different place, both.
So they're in a different place. I have this pension to prioritize. Right. Here's the bear range. After the cabinet yak is I think there are some things in the solar bitter that are appropriate. JJ and Cheryl have been working on some things, and that's clear. Structure for garbage and sanitation that works for both black bears and occasional walking dog grizzly bear. The solar Bitterroot. Those things that that we're not spending all our resources on that could or should otherwise be spent on occupied grizzly bear. Yet some preemptive conversations, actions about bear attractions that cross boundaries between grizzly bears and black bears. So that's clear from my perspective. I think there's this desire doing things in the Selway Bitterroot right now that may be distracting from our priority work occupied. And I get that there's people that work in the Selway Bitterroot that aren't going to be working in those systems. Focus from this executive committee. I'm going to stay focused on occupied, not occupied. Maybe that'll start a conversation.
And again, the question here is there anything that you're seeing, you know, there was an affirmative need to provide some guidance to Yellowstone, for example, and to suggest, hey, conservation strategy needs to be maintained and updated. If there's not a similar need for the other subcommittees, then there's not a need. I'm not saying you have to say something to each subcommittee.
I guess for me, it seems like we need to provide some guidance. Otherwise, why do we need a subcommittee?
Yeah. So, but I think they'll fall into the guidance that's coming to all the subcommittees related to this 5-year planning process. So as Ed suggests, there may be some actions related to, right now it's document presence and absence and doing some of the I&E and conflict work that is applicable now and would be helpful and important later, potentially. So maybe if they can line out, you know, again, what's planned, what's accomplishable, and how to, yeah, question.
You know, I guess the question I would have is, there's definitely things that we don't have in place in the Bitterroot ecosystem right now. And I don't know if there are things that could be put on a subcommittee, but they're more some of the federal things that we need to address. We responded to a letter to develop BMUs. That request to develop food storage orders. There are things that, you know, I know the subcommittee has talked about, worked on, but I don't know if it's something that, I guess it'd be good to hear from JJ of what they've been doing and things like that before we would direct them. But we know that, you know, from the federal side, you know, we're being going to do this, when you're going to take the steps. I know there's some things in place, and there's Clearwater in their plan of vision that when occupancy does occur, then certain things. Although I just don't know that well enough, and if it's something that life service thing with input from the subcommittee.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit on that, if everybody can hear me. Yeah, we've been kind of, you know, things come through the subcommittee about different ideas. I think everybody's kind of working on their own scope of work, dealing with grizzly bears within their agency. And we really haven't had any like subcommittee directed projects out there to focus on a specific item. So we've talked about food storage orders. We've talked about bear communities, outreach, things like this, and also habitat mapping and all that type of stuff. But we have no really clear direction. It's more just, it's coming out of an agency. Hey, we'd like to do this. What do people think? And people work on it on their own capacity within their own area, but it hasn't been really focused as an ecosystem-wide project. And I think that would be beneficial to the Bitterroot subcommittee from the executive subcommittee to kind of get some clear expectations and directions. You know, kind of as Jackie said, we have a lot of professional time and effort putting into the subcommittee too, in having what we can work on or what the executive committee wants to work on, where we're at within the Bitterroot with occupancy or lack of occupancy. I think that would be important direction to give to us that we can share back over. What would you like us to work on? Strong things we do work on is public outreach. We're kind of doing some social science stuff, kind of gauging perceptions of the public across the area. Of course, we all work on conflict when it comes up, but having some clear direction on that, I think even though we're a way different spot, different tier, even from NCDE, Yellowstone, and even the Selkirk Cabinet Yaks, still, I think there's really productive stuff we could work on and get some clear direction. Instead, I think everybody's just kind of spitballing different ideas and different workloads, and that'd be really beneficial. I think to give us even just some a couple clear projects that would let us get to that next step. You know, as the Bitterroot progresses. As Ed said, we do have a lot of interest in the Bitterroot. It's kind of that spot in between, or other spots in between, plus the Bitterroot of everybody's excited, you know, with bear expansion. And I think that so we have a lot of interest in the Bitterroot. So having some focused direction would really be beneficial for our group. So
AJ, that's really helpful for us to kind of, you know, understand what you're doing and then what would be helpful so that we get that alignment. So I think you gave us, I heard occupancy. I'm looking at my, you know, folks. Okay, so we can do that. Somebody want to put that in?
Yeah, so I don't know that there's an explicit direction for you, JJ. You know, I think that what you described is what I have observed is agencies are doing their jobs and they're using the subcommittee to coordinate as intended. And
maybe I'll help out.
Yeah.
So I mean, thanks, JJ. This is Chris again. You know, I mean, obviously, the federal, you know, us and the Fish and Wildlife Service, you know, we had that meeting a couple of years ago. We tried to get another meeting established and we just couldn't pull it off. But there is, you know, and I think we really want to be cognizant back to the subcommittee to say, would you, so is it more important, and maybe this is the conversations you have with your subcommittee and Cheryl and others, is it better that the federal side of the things work on this stuff, or do you think that, would you like for the subcommittee to work on this as a whole, where you've got the tribe, commissioners, people like that are more engaged and more involved with maybe helping define what the BMU should be, or what should be the sideboards of developing food storage orders, things like that. I mean, I think that's because I think that's where we continue to hear from the service to say, you know, we want you to start thinking about this stuff and putting these things in place. But we really want to, again, be cognizant of, you've got things started, you're working on it, we want to involve you, we want to engage you. And so would it be better that you think you have capacity to take that on and run that through the subcommittee and bring it back to both the Forest Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service?
yeah, I think one of the benefits that I've been seeing in the subcommittee is, you know, the diversity of location. Folks are working in different communities, bringing that to the table, different points of view. I think that's a strong point, and so I think there is some capacity with that. I guess my point was, you know, we have work to do. We're all doing work, but what level do we bring that back when we do have ideas about habitat units or you know, our bear searches, or, you know, looking for bears? When we have those come in to the subcommittee, how do we bring those up to the executive committee first and say, is this a priority item for the executive committee? Should we be working on this as a subcommittee? And there's definitely benefits to do that, and I think it'd be probably a good process.
I guess just to put a placeholder in, I just want to be cognizant of the capacity of Hillary and her team to not take on more than they can handle. So as we think about if in fact we're going to move forward with conservation strategies and these other ecosystems, it would help to not necessarily presume, and I'm not suggesting anyone is, so this may be a statement that doesn't need to be made, but just want people to be cognizant of that workload and not presuming the service wouldn't necessarily need it, or, well, I just leave it at that. It'd be nice if maybe other partners, Scott, I think you played a pretty big role in the NCDE conservation strategy, so just thinking about capacity and priorities for the recovery program and other people who can do some of the heavy lifting. Not saying we wouldn't be engaged, but there's a difference between being.
Right.
It's a difference between the, what do they say, the difference between the pig and the chicken at breakfast. The chicken's involved, but the pig is committed, the bacon and egg breakfast.
That's an analogy that I'm gonna have to think about for a while.
Feel free to use that anytime you want, Jack.
I will put it in my back pocket. So I think I think everyone's kind of in agreement. I heard Ed say, listen, maybe we should be focusing on where there are bears as far as these bigger efforts, the intensity of the work, what you're saying, Matt, of you have limited capacity, so where would we focus that? But I heard JJ say it would be helpful if you could even like point, give us some direction of what would be the highest priority, not commitment to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but as a subcommittee, like what should they be doing? Working on occupancy or the public outreach, or just some, are they on the right track? Maybe it's just as simple as an affirmation. But being in a different place than I think where we're at with the NCD and the yes. So I'm not hearing actually a lot of variance of opinion on that, I don't think. Am I right, wrong?
Right. Some of the things JJ talked about are actually what's in your current plan now. Right.
Yeah, so maybe that's just that affirmation of JJ, you're probably on the right track.
And what I'm gonna do is try to restate the task of reporting in December, so that there's a consistent format and that it ties to a plan that is published that you all know is the plan and can guide going forward.
So maybe for Selway Bitterroot, it is continue with the program you have lined out right now on your 5-year plan. So would we give them anything additional? Or, yeah.
So I'm not gonna go to the bacon and the chicken, but thank you, Matt, for talking about priority and capacity. And I don't think anybody was talking about developing a conservation strategy for the Selway Bitterroot. It's not an occupied zone. So the priority and the capacity to identify the elements for the cabinet yak, I think, is a priority. Even with limited resources we have, we need to get that. But over on the Selway Bitterroot, Chris, you talked about meetings that the Forest Service is having with the Fish and Wildlife Services. And you put it in terms, I wrote it down, think about this stuff and put things in place. And I don't necessarily know what this stuff is and what those things were that were put in place, but I think it's probably a may occur map and some Section 7 consultations. I don't know, but I think those things should have the awareness of the committee so that there are other perspectives that can be added to the contemplation of what those that stuff is and those things are, and to what extent they get implemented.
So I think that is valuable for the subcommittee to understand. And I understand the responsibility of the service and the responsibility of the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Forest Service. But there's more players, right? And these committees are to coordinate across these governances, the implementation of these things. And so I think that the work you specifically do with the Fish and Wildlife Service related to grizzly bears in the subcommittee should be viewed through the lens of the broader participants in the subcommittee to help you all to gauge where you're going and how you're going there. So I just wanted to add that. I think my agency, county commissioners, whatever, all have some legitimate opinions about how may occur, gets used in Section 7 consultation, what a food storage order means in unoccupied habitat where the state has lawful bear baiting seasons for black bears, as well as trapping regulations. So there needs to be a more collective discussion about those before federal agencies implement actions independently. That makes sense.
Oh, yeah, no, that's kind of, and I agree, I mean, that's kind of the approach we've been taking before we got too far down the road. I think the conversations that we had pre-COVID were just, then I'll rely on Hillary and Jennifer, and I think I don't know if Sandy's on.
She is.
You know, the service, and Jody, you were part of those conversations too, came to the Forest Service to say, you know, now that bears are starting to show up, it would be good to be proactive and put certain things in place, right? That, you know, consider food storage orders. What are we doing with, defining bear management units outside of the, you know, outside of the wilderness, things like that. So that as bears start coming in, you know, that we have these things in place. And so we had the one meeting, had some things started. Was going to try to set up a second meeting, going to get a bunch of players at the table, but that's